I was born in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania on July 29th, 1945 at the Bryn Mawr Hospital. I grew up in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, which was 3 miles from Bryn Mawr, I guess. And my mother's family had moved to that area when she was a young girl. And my dad, who grew up in West Philadelphia, met my mother and kind of fell in love with Ardmore more than West Philly, and moved out to Ardmore and stayed there for their entire lives. My parents both were born in America. My mother was born in the Ardmore area, which is a suburb of Philadelphia I had mentioned. My dad was born in Philadelphia and lived in West Philadelphia for his life until he and my mother were married, and as I said, he had moved to Ardmore at that time. Uh, their parents were all born in Italy, except for my paternal grandmother, who actually was born in Hamilton, New Jersey. But my maternal grandparents and my father's father were all born in Italy. In fact, while we're on the topic of immigration, I just was awarded dual citizenship in Italy about 3 months ago. Yeah, so kind of excited about that.
All right. Your father's name?
My father's name is is Michael Pedicin. It was spelled a little differently. Originally, the Pedicin name was Pedicino, so it had an O on it. When my grandfather was naturalized here, someone took the O off and put an E on, so it became like the word medicine, Pedicin with an E. That's how they pronounced it. And don't ask me how, but my sister, who's 3 years older, was born at Bryn Mawr Hospital, and on her birth certificate it said Pedicin with an E. When I was born 3 years later, mine has no vowel at all on the end, so it was Pedicin with no vowel on the end.
And your mother's name?
And my mother's name was Tronceliti. In Italian would be Tronceliti. And she came from a large Italian family who a lot of her, in addition to her father, her uncles had also come here from Italy. And they all settled in the mainline area of Philadelphia, interestingly enough. And I think every one of her uncles and or cousins, including her brothers, one brother ended up being physicians or lawyers, every one of them. So I grew up on Wynwood Road in Ardmore. My dad, who passed away 4 years ago, 3 weeks shy of the age of 99, still lived in that house, very healthfully actually up until 3 weeks before. It was a nice neighborhood to grow up in, very liberal, diverse area. Ardmore was at the time. And again, from an Italian family, so I think within, if I remember correctly the amount, I think the 2 blocks of Wynwood Road, one on which we lived, I think there were 11 of my mother's direct cousins that had homes on those 2 blocks. And interestingly enough, directly across the street from us, if we looked out of our front door, my maternal grandmother lived with us, by the way. So I had my mother and my grandmother take care of me as a young boy in those days. That, you know how that was. And my father's sister married my mother's brother, and they lived directly across the street from us. So if we looked out of our front door, their house was there. And they had one son, Monty, who was really like a brother to me, and talking about blood relation too, same family exactly, mother and father. And Ardmore was a wonderful place to grow up, I must say. It was a really fun, safe, healthy place to be. Talking about musicality or music in my family, obviously my dad was a musician, and I guess we'll talk about him a little more later. But there were no other members of our family that were musicians or artists, really. My father's 2 sisters, neither was musically involved. And as I said, my mother's relatives were all doctors and lawyers, tailors, barbers, a few of those guys in Ardmore too over the years. But my dad had a heavy influence on me, although I'll tell a little story about my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who I ended up being very, very close with. And I think he was very attracted to me as one of his grandsons because I used to love to learn from him. He spoke with an Italian accent forever. He lived till the age of 92. But he loved the arts, loved music, and played the accordion. He did not play very well, however. And as I got older and more able as a kid to be able to even teach him, even in my college years, I remember many days leaving Center City and driving to his house or his home in West Philadelphia and sitting with him and teaching him a little more about how to count properly in music and some of the harmonic structures and all of that in accordion, about the accordion or keyboard rather. But he loved it, you know, and he was devoted to it. But he really didn't have enough background when he was younger to learn properly. I mean, my grandfather was interesting. You know, when I used to talk about going to Italy, even touring in Europe in those early years, when I would ask him if he would like to go back to Italy, he would say, "No, you go to Italy. I have no need to go back," because he left Italy when it was not an easy place to be. His name was Michael Pedicin in Italy, and he was from a town called Foggia, which is part of Puglia in Italy, Puglia. So, and he left there when he was about 23 years old. My dad was not a jazz musician. My dad was a really talented man. He had perfect pitch, and he grew up and had asked his mother for an alto saxophone, which she managed to be able to buy him. And due to the fact that he had perfect pitch, the alto saxophone is tuned in the key of E flat, and perfect pitch relates to the key of C as a tonality, like the piano would.
Right.
And he didn't know anything about any of that, so when he played on the alto, what would be an A for any student learning to play the alto saxophone, he called that a C because that's what it was in our universe. It was a C, and he told me the story about when he went to his first lesson with an older Italian gentleman in the neighborhood, and the man said, "I would like you to play, if you can, for me a C scale." My father played it in the proper key, and he said, "No, I said a C," meaning a C on the saxophone. My father didn't know what that meant. You know, he just knew what a C was, again, in the universe. So my dad, as I said, was not a jazz musician. And like a lot of us, you know, he started to play at a very young age. He was on a show in Philadelphia when he was a child at 12 called The Children's Hour by a man that was, his name was Stanley Brosa, who was the creator of that show. And in fact, that's how I think the pronunciation and the E came off of my father's name, because my father told me that he had said, people don't know how to say it. Is it Pedicin, Pedicini? So let's take the E off. And that's how I guess I got it later in life without the E for my father's entertainment or show business career. So anyway, my dad played the saxophone, played it very well, had great chops, so to speak, great technique, as I said, perfect pitch. But he played the saxophone as an entertainer. And his desire in life was to make people happy, smile, dance, and have fun. So he really did not introduce me to jazz. But I idolized him and just about watched his every movement. And even as a child, they told me I used to ask him for a saxophone strap that I could wear around my neck just to be, even when I was at home as a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, because I wanted to be like Dad. So I grew up listening to him, listening to his rehearsals with the band. My father had one band. He had the same band from the time he was 17 years old, and they all played into their 80s. The same people. He changed two of the guys later on in life that got a little older, but for the most part, that was it. So when I was a kid, I went to the elementary school that was about a block and a half away from our house in Ardmore. And on days that he would rehearse at our house, I would tear home after school so I could, I'm talking about, first grade, second grade, third grade, I walked to school, it was a block and a half away. And so I could listen to his rehearsals. So that was the first music that I listened to and learned. My first real jazz hearing was, I would say, at the age of 13. So it would put me at 1958. I can almost remember this day combing through this LPs at a record store it was called Mads Records, on Lancaster Avenue in Ardmore, and I came across an album, Cannonball, and it was Cannonball's first album, and Cannonball looked so cool and happy, and he had his alto in front of him, and I bought it for, I don't remember what, probably $1.99 or something in those days, and when I heard it at home, I guess that's the day I had no need for any other music in my life. I mean, that got me. So from Cannonball, then I went to others, and especially John Coltrane also, who I realized was playing at that age, already at 1958, and was doing what he was doing. So that was my real introduction to jazz at that time. But it was by myself. I mean, I stumbled, saw the cover of an album that looked interesting to me, and I knew it was in the jazz section, and I bought it, took it home and listened to it, and I remember my parents to this day saying that they could not get me away from what was the stereo in those days, just lying on my back on the floor playing albums by Miles and Cannonball and Coltrane.
What's your favorite tune? Do you remember a tune from that record?
From Miles, that early record? I don't remember a tune that. No, I don't, because that was his. I mean, in those days, he was pretty much playing standards that he was recording. So I don't remember.
Was Bobby Timmons on that?
Yep.
Isn't that one of the, like, Monin or?
I think that was early. I think that album was before Monin.
Okay.
I think. I mean, I have it. I took it out for you. Actually, we could even look at it. It's on a music.
I think Bobby Timmons, like Monin or this, that, there, this here.
That was they were a little later. I would say they were like 1960. Yeah, but I have the Cannonball LP out.
Let's take a picture.
Yeah.
So, when you were turned on by jazz, at that point, just give me a kind of because you're 13, right? So, your teenage years, how did you branch out, and who did you listen to? Because you were playing alto sax at that time?
Yeah, all alto, because my dad played alto, so I just played alto until I started to listen to John Coltrane, and we'll talk about that, I guess, a little later. But what happened to me, and I think it was a very wise decision of my father's, he never gave me a music lesson. So he kept our relationship as father and son, and it was always a good one, always a healthy one. I always appreciated what he did, although I wanted to move, I knew at that age after I listened to jazz, in another musical direction. And the good part is, he always unconditionally respected what I cared about in music, and respected that, and allowed me to move in that direction without saying, as a father, you'll be able to do better if you play commercial music, and you'll make a better living, and there's more opportunity. Not that he never said that there would be, but he never pushed or promoted that. And I can also recall, probably at the age of maybe 14, maybe even 15, practicing in my room when my dad was on his way out to his gig, and I remember running down the steps and saying, "I did it! I can improvise! I just improvised for the first time," and I guess it made sense, whatever I felt that I was doing, and it made sense to me, whatever I was playing, but I ran down to tell him that.